Hello everybody and welcome to Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. I'm Jack and today I'm finally here once again with our Toadbats deck analysis for the expanded format. I tried uploading this on Friday, the audio wasn't really working. I tried uploading again on Monday night and the audio still wasn't working, but I finally figured out the problem. So I can finally get this deck analysis to you guys. Just a couple of notices beforehand. First off, this is only going to be the analysis. I'm not going to do a battle with this video, within this video, just because you're going to be getting another deck analysis tomorrow. I don't want to make this one too long either. So I'm just going to get the list out to you. And secondly, this is Michael Pramawat's list from, I believe, now don't quote me on this, I think it was Houston Regionals 2 or 3 weeks ago. Houston Regionals where he took first place with this very list. So yeah, that's where I got the list from. Obviously, Pokemon are putting up all of the lists on their website. Yeah, their website now. After the events. So yeah, this is his list card for card. So I'm just going to go over it, and I think I'm going to explain why I think he chose to put in some of these cards. Why he chose some cards over others, things like that. So yeah, let's jump straight into it. First off, we have 3 Seismitoad EX, of course. The deck's main attacker, Quaking Punch, locking your opponent out of items and doing 30 damage at the same time. Really good attack, especially when paired with lasers and bats, and getting up to a half-decent damage output. Seismitoad can be a real threat. He's been a threat ever since he was first released back in Furious Fists, and he still remains prominent now. So yeah, Seismitoad, really strong Pokemon. We're only running 3, simply because you're rarely going to need the 4th. The 4th is kind of a luxury that you don't have to have. There are 7 good starters in the deck, meaning that odds are you're probably going to end up getting a Seismitoad into the active at some point on your first turn, even if you don't start with one. You're very rarely going to need the 4th one. Obviously, if you prize 1 or 2, then that's unlucky and you are going to be stuck. But odds are you're never really going to need the 4th. So just having 3 is an okay number. Moving on to the back line, we have a 4-3-3 back line, quite a thick back line, just because Toad's damage output isn't great on its own. So of course we do indeed have 4 of the free flight Zubat, having free retreat when it's got no energy attached. We're very rarely going to be attaching energy to any of the back line. We will do in some certain scenarios, but odds are it's never going to happen. So Zubat's always going to have free retreat. And these are the other 4 good starters. We've obviously got 3 Seismitoad, and then 4 Zubat as well. So yeah, there are 7 good starters, because these guys are free retreat. We've got 3 Sneaky Bite Golbat, again, just for the, pretty much just for the ability to put an extra 2 damage counters where you want. Obviously without Trump card, Toadbats has had to be a little bit more conservative about where it places counters. Being a little bit more strategic and nailing exactly the 6 prizes you want, rather than when the deck had Trump card, you could just sort of place them anywhere and just have lots of options on the board. I feel the deck has to be a little bit more streamlined, a little bit more focused on knowing exactly where it's going to take its 6 prizes. And that being the case, we have to really think about where we put our Sneaky Bites and Surprise Bites. And then speaking of Surprise Bite, we do indeed have 3 Crobat as well. Surprise Bite putting 3 damage counters, really useful. And then also we can Skill Dive. We do have Basic Energy in the deck, so we can Skill Dive if we really need to, against some annoying Pokemon that perhaps we've peppered up, done a lot of damage to. They've retreated to the bench. We can still Skill Dive them to take some knockouts later on in the game if it's just the last 2 knockouts we really need. Moving on, we have 2 Shaman, of course, for the setup ability. Sky Return can be used. We are of course using DCEs because this is Toad. You can use Sky Return, but odds are you're just going to be using Shaman for the setup ability to be able to refill your hand once you've played it down, got what you need from your deck using Ultra Balls, things like that. And then you can set up just for more cards without using your supporter. Everyone knows how good Shaman is. Everyone knows why Shaman is used. I don't really feel this needs much justification. The 2 really interesting cards are actually the Den and the Mewtwo. The Mewtwo less so, but the Den is really interesting, and I really like this. So in Expanded, a really big archetype at the moment is Yveltal Archeops. Yveltal Archeops is really strong, locks down your evolutions, and and obviously Yveltal itself is a really strong Pokemon. With Deden is a really good counter for Yveltal, simply because if your opponent wants to build up a Yveltal that's big enough to knock out a Seismitoad in one hit, they're going to have a lot of energy on them. Energy Short is going to be doing a lot of damage to them. But even if they don't, even if they've just got 2 or 3 energy on them, Energy Short is still doing really big damage when you factor in things like Muscle Band, before weakness, of course, or previous bat damage, laser damage. Even with a few energy, Deden can still be doing huge amounts. So Deden is a really useful Pokemon. Just pretty much for things like Ray and Yveltal, being able to deal with them. Deden is a really good counter, so yeah, I really like the Deden in here. And then we do, of course, have a Mewtwo as well. Mewtwo is another Pokemon that's just kind of good for finishing off games, taking the last two or three prizes on things that we've perhaps done damage to early on. This is another reason why we don't really need a 4th Seismitoad, because we do have a 4th attacker in Mewtwo. And if we can sit behind the Seismitoad, just sort of building it up, we can indeed... building up the Mewtwo, we can indeed build up a big enough Mewtwo that we can just take 2 or 3 straight prizes in 2 or 3 turns, and just finish the game off really quickly from there. So Mewtwo is really good for anything that we've just sort of done a little bit of damage to, perhaps things that want to get really sort of built up against us. Obviously, anything that puts a lot of energy on here is really weak to either Deden or Mewtwo, but Mewtwo's more versatile in that it's not going for a specific weakness, it's just going for anything that really wants to set up against us. We can drop a Mewtwo in a turn, obviously because we've got so many free retreaters, and we're already running DCEs. We can drop the Mewtwo in one turn, get it set up in a turn, and just build up some huge damage out of nowhere, which again is even bigger with things like Muscle Band and Laser Bank, and the previous bat damage we've already done. Moving on to the trainers, the A-spec of choice is Computer Search. I think this is definitely the best one to go for. Computer Search is one of the only cards, it may be the only card, I can't quite remember, but it's one of the only cards definitely that can get you a DCE from the deck, meaning that you're going to be Quaking Punching on turn 1 a lot more consistently. Obviously, the deck relies on Quaking Punch, especially in the early turns, just to slow your opponent down, sort of to Seismitoad's speed. So therefore, Quaking Punch therefore the DCs are really important to get in the early turns, meaning that Computer Search is probably the best A-spec we've got. Of course, now we don't have Trump Card, Dowser Machine could be justified just to get back some of the trainers we've got. If you need one more trainer, particularly for a certain matchup, Dowser Machine perhaps would be better for you. And then, of course, I completely forget the girl's name who played Rock Guard in her Toad list, which I thought was really clever. One of the best uses of Rock Guard I think we've ever seen, or an A-spec in general I think we've ever seen. Rock Guard was such a good idea for all the Toad mirror matches. I feel so awful because I've forgotten who it was, but I know it was a really good call on her part, and it really sort of made your Seismitoad matchup a lot more favourable in the mirror. So yeah, if you want to go down that route, I suppose you can. I still feel Computer Search at the moment is the best one though, just to be able to secure the DCEs and therefore the Quaking Punches turn 1. But if not, just to be able to grab some of these trainers a little bit later on. If you've already got the DCs and stuff, you can save the Computer Search for some of these trainers later on to be able to carry on your locking strategy and things like that. Moving on to some of those annoying trainers, we first off have a single Enhanced Hammer. Enhanced Hammer is just really good at the moment. There's so many special energy about. Giratina is using it. Reshiram is using it. Reshiram? Rayquaza, sorry. I don't know what I'm saying. Reshiram. Rayquaza is using it. Any fighting Pokemon is using Strongs. So many Pokemon are using DCs. Enhanced Hammer is just always going to have a target on the field at some point. So yeah, Enhanced Hammer is really good. And then being able to slow your opponent down even further by taking an energy away from them, just sort of puts them behind for another turn, and all of this time, the poison damage, the Quaking Punch damage, the bat damage is all building up, and Seismitoad quickly, rather than speeds up to the level of the opponent, it slows down the opponent to Seismitoad's own level to be able to compete with some of these really, really fast decks. So yeah, the 1.5 Hammer is really, really useful for that. Of course, we have 4 Hypnotoxic Laser. This is one of the big reasons why the damage output of Seismitoad is bearable, simply because it can do an extra 30 damage just through poison each turn. I don't really feel the need to justify the 4 Hypnotoxic Laser. It's pretty standard in every expanded Toads list now. Moving on, we have a single Startling Megaphone. Again, just an annoying disruption card. You'll notice we're not playing any Headringer. That is something a little bit different. Some lists do like to play Headringer. I didn't mind a Headringer or two in my Toad list, simply because it made the mirror a little bit easier. But even so, this can technically make other matchups easier, just by being able to Startling Megaphone off really useful tools for your opponent. But even if it's not crucial, just getting rid of a Muscle Band here or there can be really, really useful. Like I say, we're not running any Headringer, so there's no detriment to us. We're not then taking away our own Headringers and slowing our strategy down. Not at all. This is just another really annoying card. There's no real specific reason I don't think for it. I think it's just the main reason is just because it's a really useful disruption tool, just to slow your opponents down even further. So yeah, the Megaphone is pretty nice. The 1 Super Rod helps us sustain sort of momentum in the late game. We can obviously go through quite a lot of the deck in turn 1 if we're really hunting for these DCEs. We've got 2 Shamans and of course 4 Sycamores, meaning that we can run through the deck pretty quickly. This way, with the Super Rod, we still have energy later on in the game to be able to continue to Quaking Punch. Obviously, a big issue with Seismitoad is if they begin to get rid of your DCEs, you run out of energy. Well, you've got 4 DCEs plus 3 Waters, plus a chance at 3 more Waters, basically, with Super Rod. If you somehow discard all 3 of the Waters early on that have already been used, you will always have more energy. It's a really, really useful tool. I'm so glad we're getting Super Rod back in Standard. I've never really liked Sacred Ash and Energy Recycler as much as Super Rod. Super Rod gets two less cards, but it does indeed get a combination of both, which I think is really important. And then obviously another big thing is the bats. Being able to, now we don't have Trump card, one of the main ways we have to get the bats back is either Sacred Ash or Super Rod. Super Rod I think is more useful because it does sustain your momentum in the late game, being able to grab the Waters back and maybe grab your Deden or your Mewtwo if you need them for later on in the game. But I think a big use for it is the bats, just to be able to pick up the bats again and carry on hitting with them, just to be able to do more damage. So yeah, Super Rod is really, really nice in the deck. We have 4 Super Scoop Up, of course. Since we're running bats, we can reuse the bats. We can heal off any damage. If we have a rough starter, we can pick up a starter if we really need to. We can pick up a Shaman and use Setup again if we get heads. There's so many uses to Super Scoop Up. Definitely really useful. I think the healing is one really big one. Just because Seismitoad slows down decks so much, it often makes it hard for them to be able to one-shot Toad. They'll perhaps be 30 or 40 damage off. But if you can pick up a Super Scoop Up heads, and then pick up the Seismitoad, you can then sort of play it all back down in one. Providing you've used a DC instead of 2 water energy, you can play it all down in one and just sort of mitigate their previous damage. They're not going to be then the damage won't have affected you. You'll have used a Super Scoop Up, which you're probably going to use for maybe 50 more damage anyway. But this way, they're going to have to deal with like a 4th Toad, or a 5th or a 6th. If you keep getting these heads, if you keep re-flipping, or if you keep picking up these Toads with the flipping mechanic of Super Scoop Up, really, really useful. And definitely a really nice sort of healing mechanism that you perhaps wouldn't usually use, or you wouldn't usually get access to, because we don't run Max Potion or things like that. We then, I keep going above, so I can't close the little text box. There we go. We then have for Ultra Ball, of course, there again no real reason to justify this. I don't think. Um, some people ran. I saw a couple of lists that ran Level Ball. Level Balls, I kind of get why you could play Level Ball, um, but Level Ball at the end of the day only searches Zubats, Golbats, and Deden. Um, that's if they were playing Deden. I don't think many lists were playing Deden, or at least lists that were playing Level Ball that I saw. Um, I don't really feel it's justified. I think you're going to run into your Zubats and Golbats quick enough to be able to not have to have specific dedicated search cards towards them. You don't mind. Deden is a one-of, so you can just pick him up and drop him down when you need him. You don't need to worry about always having one on hand or always having access to one on hand. You can sort of see what you're playing and drop Deden at the last minute. It's only one energy cost, so as long as you know it's in there, I don't really feel you need a specific search card for Deden. And therefore, of course, Ultra Ball is really good with Shaman, so I think the 4 Ultra Ball is the best way to go here. It's the only way to search out Mewtwo, it's the only way to search out Shaman, and Crobat, and then Toad as well. So, I think Ultra Ball is the best way of being able to get all of the pieces you need without sort of skimping out on perhaps a level ball or two just for the early bats. I think the 4 Ultra Ball, sorry, is a lot more consistent. We have 4 VS Seeker, again, I feel it's pretty justified. Being able to reuse your strong supporters is really, really strong. Not having to worry if you have to get rid of your one-of copies early on, just to search for your DCEs, you've still got access to them. VS Seeker is VS Seeker, I don't think there's really anything too untoward about it. Onto the supporters themselves, we have 1 AZ. A lot of decks that play bats will run 1 AZ, just as like an automatic scoop up. You can use it as healing if you've... This works really well with Super Rod, in all fairness, because you can pick up your Toad, discard the 2 waters, and then Super Rod the 2 waters back into the deck. So therefore, it's kind of like you didn't really lose the energy. As long as you've got another access to another energy or another Toad, it's kind of like you didn't lose the energy at all, and therefore you didn't lose really any momentum. But obviously, picking up bad starters is really useful. Picking up Shamans again, really useful. Picking up Crobats to be able to do an extra 50 damage, just to sort of perhaps push you over the damage cap that you would normally be hitting. Again, really useful. There's so many uses for AZ. Definitely one of my favourite cards that's in this deck. We have 1 Colrus. I think Colrus in Expanded is completely justified, simply because Skyfield's in format, and as long as Skyfield is in format, Colrus will be a good supporter, simply because there will be decks where you just get huge hand sizes, and the bigger your hand size, the more annoying trainers you have to be able to slow your opponent down more and make sure you can catch up with them rather than them sort of storming ahead of you. So I think as long as Skyfield's in the format, Colrus is going to be a good supporter. And then of course it's an okay supporter even when Skyfield isn't in play or in your opponent's deck. You can still get 3 or 4 cards from your side, not including their bench as well, because you're always going to have 2 or 3 bats on the bench, maybe a Shaman or 2, or an attacker. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you're always going to be having 3 or 4 Pokemon on the bench, no matter what with the deck. So therefore, you should get at least a handful of cards pretty much all the time with Colrus. So I think there's always going to be a good time to use Colrus in most games, more often than not. We have 1 Lysander. Again, just being able to pick your targets, really, really useful. Another way of being able to slow down your opponent's strategy because they have to manually retreat, because they can't get into their switches, they can't use their switches. They have to attach their energy onto something that they would rather be attaching to attack you. They have to use energy to retreat instead. So yeah, Lysander, really, really useful. I like to run 2 in a lot of decks at the moment, but there is only space for 1 in here. I can see why, because the list is pretty tight. But yeah, 1 Lysander is really good. And then 3 N, of course. N is one of Toad's favourite partners, especially when you're item locking them. They're just drawing into items. It's really, really difficult for them to be able to get out of that item lock, because all they're drawing, you're lowering their hand size, and if they haven't been playing their items, they're going to be drawing into those items again. So their deck's just going to clog up with items that they can't use, providing you're continually using Quaking Punch. So N just sort of gets stronger and stronger throughout the game because they get less cards to start with. They're also drawing more of their items that they haven't been able to use, whilst you can still use all of these cards in your deck. There's nothing you can't use, providing they're not locking you, and you can just carry on sort of slowing them down and slowly sort of outpace them a little bit. And then finally for Juniper, just because Juniper is really good, probably the best support we've got, I still think so. The stadiums, we have one Silent Lab. Silent Lab is really nice just for slowing your opponent down as well. Locks out their Shamans, which is really, really useful. But just other things that you perhaps wouldn't usually think of. I think Shaman is probably the biggest deal we've got here. Mew is another big one. Obviously, Night March can be a bit of a problem, especially if they get a big turn 1. So yeah, there's some nice little uses for Silent Lab, just to be able to slow your opponent down turn 1, especially if you've used your two Shaman, early on. You can drop the Silent Lab. The only thing it's then going to affect is the Zubat, but the Zubats eventually get free retreat when they evolve into Golbats and Crobats anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So the one Silent Lab is kind of nice, but obviously we have two Verbank City Gym, because this is primarily the stadium we're going to want in play. Letting you do an extra 20 damage between turns if Pokemon are poisoned is so strong. Sort of means that Toad can catch up with other Pokemon that would usually out-hit Toad on a general basis. Verbank just sort of brings them back down, and again makes Toad's 30 damage seem a bit more justifiable when you've got Bats and the Muscle Bands and the Lasers. It definitely builds up a lot quicker than a lot of people would first expect. And then finally, 3 Muscle Band, again, just to not only do a bit more damage, stops things like Head Ringers as well, which is really important. But yeah, just pushing Toad's damage output over the cap of what it would perhaps be otherwise. Definitely a really, really useful attack, or useful card to be able to make the attack even better. I think if the attack normally was 50, it would be a little bit broken. I think the fact that you have to have the Muscle Band is a pretty good balance. So yeah, it's definitely a really good card to have. We've only got 3 because we've only got 3 Toad. We don't need a 4th, just because even with 3 Toad and 3 Muscle Band, odds are you're probably only going to use 2 on Toads, and you're perhaps going to use 1 on a Deden or a Mewtwo instead. So we don't need a 4th. I don't think the 4th is ever really needed, even when you've got 4 Toad, in all fairness. So yeah, and then onto the energy, nothing really too out there. We've got 4 double colourless and 3 water. 4 DCE just to be able to power things up in a turn. Toad can use it. Pretty much every attacker in the deck can actually use it, because all of the attackers are colourless, bar of course Zubat, but we're not going to be using Zubat to attack anyway. So yeah, all of the attackers can use double colourless, so you can set them all up in a turn. Ideally, you're going to want double colourlesses on Mewtwo and Toad, but if you need them on other things as well, that's completely fine. But for the other Pokemon with lower energy attack costs, we do have 3 water, just to be able to not waste our DCEs, because DCEs are kind of the lifeblood of the deck. If you can't get into the DCEs, you're really going to struggle. So just make sure you can get into the DCEs and you're not wasting them on other things. And then of course, the water energy do an extra 20 damage with Mewtwo each time you add a water energy on. So lots of different uses, not just for things like the Bats and the Deden. You can push Mewtwo's damage output a little bit higher, just to reach into those one-hit knockout zones, especially if you've done a little bit of damage beforehand, making Mewtwo a really nice sort of late-game sweeper. If you've just been locking for a little while, you can then just finish off 2 or 3 prizes, just taking knockouts that you would have taken perhaps a little bit slower with Seismitoad. Mewtwo can do it a little bit quicker. You're not locking them, but you can sort of increase your pace really quickly by dropping a Mewtwo with a DC and a Muscle Band. You're already doing 60 before you even consider what damage they've already got on them and their energy. So yeah, Mewtwo is a really nice attacker in the deck. But yeah, let's let's keep our fingers crossed that this actually recorded. Thank you very much for watching. I'm sorry it's been a little bit late. I should have really tried to figure out this problem a little bit earlier in the week, but I've had a bit of a mental week. Lots of schoolwork and things. But yeah, I'm happy to bring you this finally. It's been a long time coming. It's been about a week in the making, but yeah, thank you very much for watching. Look out for another expanded deck analysis over the next couple of days. We will indeed have a second one. This isn't your only expanded deck analysis for the week. So yeah, look out for that. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Jack from Omnipoke, and I will see you all in another video.